All right, part one, we talked about a lot of the structural factors of the great wealth transfer, some of the math and some of the key figures who may have benefited from it. Shout out Elon Musk. In this conversation, it's more about the individual relationships that happen because of public family money and secret family money. Malcolm, we'll throw this premise at you that you wrote, so I don't know why I'm delivering it, but I will tell you this premise that not only is the great wealth transfer underway, it's also reshaping expectations and having an unintended impact on romantic relationships of the generations doing the inheriting. So there's an impact from the great wealth transfer on relationships. I may push back on that because class has always been a part of dating. So I wonder where you're getting this conclusion.
I'm glad you framed it that way. Aristocracies are a thing as old as probably gold bars at this point, right? However, they were for the 1%, the tippy top, tippy top. So 0.1%. And everyone else aspired to be that someday and would stand back and admire the royal family. And oh my God, how wonderful that is that the king is marrying off his daughter to the king over there's son. And we're going to make this a merger of equals so that our wealth continues to prosper for future generations, and on and on and on. And eventually, the trickle-down economic effect of that is like most luxury goods, where it once was a thing that there was a time when only wealthy businessmen could fly on airplanes. And now, thanks to Spirit Airlines, anybody can get on a plane and go anywhere they want to go. You may not be able to take a bag with you. That's a whole different conversation. But anybody can get on an airplane in 2026 and go anywhere around the world they want to go. That is the same thing that I'm talking about happening here, where it used to be a thing where marriages were solely based on protection of wealth, like you're talking about in an aristocracy. But now, in our inheritocracy, it is a world where there are mergers being conducted solely with the goal in mind of protecting mom and dad's wealth. Ooh.
Solely. I feel like this is something you've seen personally. I don't know if it's just something that always had, if it's something that always has been, which is there's the traditional gender take that men marry based on attractiveness and women marry more so based on social class and protection. I think that can be true in some instances, not true in other instances, but I don't know if just the rise of mom and dad having extra money plays into that as much as, what someone does for work and that sort of thing, or if it is dramatically changed as this, trillions and trillions of dollars of inheritance may be passed down. I
want to stick there.
I wonder
real
if
quick.
It's same as it ever was. No, Hannah has something to say.
No, but I want to say this, and I want to watch Hannah's face as I say it because I'm curious where she's going to land as I deliver this. What you're talking about. So I've been talking about this K-shaped economy getting steeper and steeper in both directions, right? And you just pointed something out. There was a time where the wealthy businessman, the ad executive on Mad Men, married his secretary. And there was literally trickle-down economics that happened where because he married this woman who is not of equal means, suddenly her station in life, financially at least, has completely changed. And now we're talking about a world where since then, that was set in the 1960s. So since then, far more women have gone to college. Far more women are in the workplace in high paying jobs, right? We still have a income disparity. I'm not discounting that, but women of today make way more money than women of the 60s used to make when they entered the workforce. And so now you have guys who are meeting their wives in college. They're equally yoked from an economic standpoint, and they are getting married, which isn't actually lifting any one person unequally out of a disadvantaged position financially. We're now having two halves coming together, making even more have. So the haves get havier and the nots get naughtier.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree in that.
Oh, wow.
I do. Because I think, like you just said, I think this is the past couple decades, especially the past like 2 decades, this has been a key time where women have been able to achieve financial independence in a way that they had never been able to before. And so, not to get in too much into like cultural and social stuff, but the question that I think a lot of like high earning women are asking is like, what can this man do for me? And so I think we are seeing marriage more of like a merger instead of like, this like economic thing that allows women to get some sort of stability. And, when inheritors marry inheritors, and the data does show that this is increasingly happening, that combined advantage compounds. And also people are getting married later. So when you're getting married at like 21, you like have no assets. You don't really have that much income. So it becomes, I think, less of a thing. But I think people are getting married later. They're coming into a relationship with their own assets, with their own kind of situation. And I think that explains why I was reading a New Yorker article about like why millennials love prenups. And I think that's a good example of that because you're coming to the table now with like much more fleshed out finances. And I think also in the past couple of years, in part because of women gaining financial independence, there's I think this cultural seeing of modern marriage as kind of two independent people with their own things, married instead of like this full, integration of a familial unit. And I'm speaking a little generally here, but, I have seen that at least in New York. And then you layer on, the parents' inheritance, bank of mom and dad and I think it goes back to this psychological earned versus inherited wealth. If you're really seeing your marriage as like two independent parties kind of coming together, maybe you feel like that inherited wealth is yours and yours alone, and you want to protect that. And I've seen this also in New York where, even if the maybe they're both Henrys, they don't have a ton of assets, but they make good money. They do a prenup simply because they know that their parents have assets that are going to pass down to them, and they want to make sure that is protected in some way.
To take it a step further, I actually know for a fact that mom and or dad has insisted that the only way we are going to support this marriage that you are proposing is if you have counter spouse sign a prenup. And we'll talk about it, familial relationships that are shaped by this great wealth transfer that we're talking about as well. But that also has an impact. It determines what you're quote unquote allowed to do as an adult person. That power dynamic of, I know I stand to inherit XYZ from mom and dad someday, so I still gotta follow along with what their game plan is today because I don't want to rock that boat.
So I think we agree, actually. What I'm saying is that sort of the base social dynamics have kind of stayed the same as it ever was, but the sort of macro environment has changed.
See, I don't think so. I don't think same as it ever was, Morgan Housel. I think more than likely what we're seeing is a shift in our social dynamics because the bank of mom and dad is hanging over the heads of millennials. And so let me back this train up really quickly. So the whole conversation, if you're just now coming into this is episode 2. It's a second piece of the puzzle of a conversation that we're having because I read this book, Inheritocracy, and got so fired up about it that I've been bugging Ricky about it, that we decided Hanna would be the perfect person to talk to because she's constantly writing about the social dynamics of money.
Local man listens to a book, decides to make 2 podcasts about it. Please continue.
Maybe we should have more conversations about this. I appreciate the challenge. But so the whole premise of this is boomers themselves, people born following World War II, the giant economic boom that came around the world following the end of World War II. Those people have an overwhelming control over the entire world and modern society because of all of the things we've already talked about, the factors that led to them building the wealth that they have, the wealth that they currently maintain, either in the stock market or in their real estate, and how they're able to exert that control over their children as they're matriculating through K through 12, also in college. Now we're talking about who they're allowed to socialize with and marry, right? And the reason that I'm bringing all that up in this conversation is because there is a point in the book where the author's talking about how many moms and daughters specifically have a relationship that looks like girlfriends where their moms, they never would have imagined a world, boomers I'm speaking of, where they hung out with their moms in nightclubs, or they went shopping with their moms wearing matching outfits. And it was this performative momhood that was kind of an eye-opening thing to me, listening to her describe it, because I'm starting to piece together like, yeah, that does sound familiar. I do know these people. I do see what she's talking about. And the question kind of underlying all that was, would they be doing these things? Would they be doing these TikTok dances with their moms performing for the world if there wasn't an inheritance they stood to gain that they were worried about upsetting her and potentially losing?
I think that raises such a good point that, we didn't even touch on in the first part of this, which is, not only does knowing you have that money changes your relationship with risk and how you make financial decisions, it also changes your relationship with your parent. And, I think whether they are explicit with them or not, there are expectations that come with getting an inheritance or having that familial support. So like you said, I mean, I do see this also like firsthand of people that do have a trust fund or are getting direct familial support, the expectations their parents place on them about who they're dating, what they're doing with their time, especially dating specifically, that I find and again, this is like where my personal knowledge, because I'm always like, why do you care what your parents think? Like, you should just do whatever you want. But then I'm like, oh, I just don't understand. I mean, like, I don't know what it's like to have your financial foundation kind of taken away from you if you kind of choose the wrong person to date or don't listen to kind of what your parents' opinions are.
Okay, after you insulted me and calling me Morgan Housel, I know what you meant by that. First
you
dates,
used the phrase same as ever.
Same as it ever was around before that guy. That wasn't a song.
You used the phrase, and it was top of mind for me.
Okay. It would have been top of mind for me too, honestly.
Fair play. First dates used to be literally going to someone's house, sitting in like a living room with the parents and the potential partner. It's the guy going to the house of the woman. And
the gentleman call.
The gentleman, yeah. And so what do you think that's about? You think that's about class? Now that's just delayed, right? Like, you meet someone on a dating app, you're having a non-committal relationship with them, then you start to get serious, then they meet the parents, and then the economic stuff may come up. But I think that, like, that's what I mean by the structure and the dynamics are there. It's just that maybe the process is different as well. I can move on to the next topic now that I've pwned you. Ben Shapiro, master of debater, friend of the show. What do you want to go? Do you want to go somewhere else?
I don't know that we're going to reach an agreement on this one. I think that you and I will just be on opposite sides.
Fair play.
Of this one. I see it Hannah's way. I think that the expectation before you ever even click on the picture or agree to go on the date is based on what is my expectation of where this person comes from, and will they align with what I've been told to go out there and fish for?
Yes. I still agree with that. Anyway, we can move on. I think one hidden dynamic with this is that once we get to the third generation, I have seen a few instances, but they stick out in my mind, of just kids with family money with a constant fallback, just making terrible art. I met one guy, met him one time. We went out to dinner with him, and we're like, oh, so what do you do? And he says, I'm a trustee. And then the second thing, it's like, oh, what do you do with your time? He goes, I make art. And then he's showing me his Instagram, and it's just like him painting crudely drawn figures of nude female forms. And I have to look at this guy's art Instagram page while he's drawing like off-center breasts and that sort of thing, and be like, oh, that's great, man. I'm glad you're doing that with your time. Or I see like family money creating, this guy, I know he has family money. His fiance has family money. They're asking for donations to support their burlesque show because it turns out that having, their advertisements of folks with too much body hair was not bringing people in the door. And now they need to ask Instagram for $400 so they can support the arts of their burlesque show. So I've seen more examples. I'll leave it there with those two disgusting things. But I don't know. I feel like this bank of mom and dad is having a huge impact on the creation of very bad art in our society.
Well, first of all, I live in Brooklyn. Do you know what percentage of Brooklyn is made up of trust fund children who are like creatives? But yeah, no, this is like a very real thing. And I think a part of it is because the creative, my lens is really New York. to be a creative, to be like an artist, whether that be a photographer, a painter, what have you, those careers traditionally are very low paying, are very volatile, typically built on contract work. So increasingly, it's become quite hard for someone to even engage in those industries without having some sort of familial support. And it's kind of this idea of like, it's like, okay, if I don't have to really work, why don't I just kind of do this like passion project? And I think that's how people get into creative things. But it's interesting to me because like a lot of the kind of the cultural aspect of this, because a lot of creative urgency comes from constraint. And so I think like some of the best art that we've seen, dating back a while is, this survival energy that's very hard to replicate and really comes across in art. And I think Inherited Wealth removes a lot of that pressure, and also I think removes the edge, and then I think leads to just bad art. But I also think, people that do have that inherited wealth, they have the financial freedom to kind of pursue these paths. And it also feeds into like, again, this is like kind of my lens in Brooklyn of the intersection of like, cosplaying being lower income and being that creative and like living in that DIY loft and, eating ramen noodles, even though you could like completely afford to like live a completely different lifestyle. I think it's very much rooted in this. Again, it's like money and identity. It's like you want to kind of see yourself as this struggling artist, even though the only reason you're able to be a struggling artist or cosplay as a struggling artist is because you have that financial foundation.
Reality TV has also made me realize how many of these people who quote unquote do real estate are also the inheritors who their art they're creating that they're doing is renovating houses. And so it's, not necessarily the reality TV you think about, but like all the different house flipping shows where somebody gets into financial trouble and at the end of the show, mom or dad shows up to come take a look at the property they've been bugging them about. And it results in them writing them another check for $200,000 to bail them out to finish the thing. Like there's so many like Property Brothers episodes that include this that I've noticed. There's a bunch of other ones, but like that's also one of the places that they go to create, quote unquote.
Can I be honest about something? If I was a trust fund baby, like I really didn't have to work or I had like immense amounts of familial support, I'd be a creative. I would be sitting in my apartment writing poetry and, going on long walks. I personally find it a little bit odder when like I meet someone who is a trust fund child who like works in investment banking and is working like 80 hours a week. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, get out of there. Like, you don't need to do that, So it is interesting the kind of choices that are made when you remove that constraint.
Yeah, which is what it's actually intended to do. It's supposed to be a thing that gives you the freedom to make decisions that are not solely economic. Like you can make good life decisions based on what you actually want to be doing, not necessarily what you feel like you have to be doing because you have to buy food and put a roof over your head.
Bad art is the right decision. Since Hannah's in Brooklyn, I figured she may have a take on this. This is something I learned about from the book, but now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. And that is that the inheritocracy may have led to the rise of what are called soft boys. You know about this, Malcolm? I just learned about it.
I know it, yeah.
Men who reject traditional masculinity, appearing sensitive and artistic. The term can be used critically to describe men who use emotional sensitivity as a manipulative tactic to avoid commitment. My favorite director, since you asked, is Greta Gerwig, and I will never be in a committed relationship. That is sort of the balance of the soft boy that I am seeing from this. I think it exists a little bit in Denver. More of the complaints we have here is Peter Pan, people who want to go to the mountains and have fun and never grow up. But I wonder, Hannah, is this a trend that you see out in Brooklyn, which are the soft boys?
Oh my God. Yeah, this is like the epicenter.
I think they call that Williamsburg, right?
Yeah, this is like the performative male. And I think too, it's like, it all feeds into like just, identity construction. And it's like, when you have the space and time to decide kind of how you want to present yourself to the world, you kind of end up falling into these, somebody who's working like 2 full-time jobs and is like struggling to pay rent. They're probably not thinking about like, how do I go like performatively read the bell jar in Central Park and, try to find my wife. It's kind of like that. And I think, and also I think with the soft boy too, there is there is a leisure associated with it as well, of like, you know, a soft life, slow moving. And I think that is a privilege that a lot of people might not be able to afford.
This episode is sponsored by Capital Area Planning Group. Capital Area Planning Group is a fiduciary wealth management firm that specializes in helping high net worth individuals and families navigate the complexities that come along with managing concentrated stock options, multiple income streams, and an ever-changing tax code. While our team of certified financial planners are well-versed in all things personal finance, our areas of expertise include equity compensation, estate planning, and multi-year tax planning. At Capital Area Planning Group, we believe in pricing transparency. That's why our fees are posted on our website, right alongside the various services we perform on behalf of our clients throughout the year. If you're tired of receiving the same cookie-cutter advice from your financial advisor, then don't wait. Reach out to us today at capgllc.com to experience a better approach to wealth management. Again, that web address is www.capgllc.com.
What I want to get to is the economic structures that this created. And I think in the book Inheritocracy, probably the most important point was made on the last page. I'll read it, quote, "My sense is that for all of the inequality, discord, and advantages we have unpicked over the past 7 chapters, the fairness of our inheritocracy will eventually reach a crunch point, not over the costs of higher education, nor over young people's ability to not get on the housing ladder, but over how we fund social care for the old," end quote. I think that is the biggest problem that will come out of this. You look at how the US government spends its money, more than half of it goes to social care for the old, Social Security, Medicare, and then also national debt interest, which is money that has already been spent by prior generations. So I think that this is sort of deserves a longer discussion, because this is the key point of the inheritocracy, which is that you have young people who may not be getting that inheritance that are going to spend a good amount of their tax dollars and effort and sweat labor in order to pay for this system that's been created.
So John D. Rockefeller was the first person on record that we know about to reach $1 billion. And at the time when this happened in the early 1900s, society was actually happy about it. Like, people were admiring his ability to pull it off. Like, it was like, oh my God, go John, go. Like, this is the coolest thing ever. What will a person even do with $1 billion? Like, I can't even wrap my mind around those kind of numbers, but good for him. And then very quickly, when it became obvious the disparity between what he was able to put in his pocket versus what actually went to the average worker, society turned very quickly. And it's the reason that we have so many public goods with the Rockefeller name on it now, in an attempt to turn around and recreate that image in the public. What you're describing, I think, is a similar situation where society starts to look around and go, oh no, like, we've unintentionally allowed this to happen, and now we have to turn and say, not on my watch. And so you'll see political figures shift. You'll get these class traders, as Roosevelt was, that came and busted things up and upended the norms that wealthier people enjoyed for a very long time. And hear the mantra of the working class person, well, more so than you already hear it, trying to take back the workers' rights and the working class and that sort of thing. And I think we're already headed in that direction, but I think this creates that explosion.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I can't imagine how, and again, I think this, again, explains so much generational resentment. I mean, if you're not getting an inheritance from your parents, and then you've been paying into this thing that, like, is going to run out of money in 10 years, and then, you don't have, like, that Social Security safety net, I would understand being resentful, and also seeing a whole generation, again, like, benefit from a handful of policies that allowed them to really create the wealth that they're in, and then kind of, again, pull the ladder up from behind them. It's, again, it explains, like, a lot of the kind of real resentment and, like, desire, I think, for real structural change. I say, this is a little bit more of a tangent, but I always say that the reason why Trump, I'm based in New York again, and Zohran Mamdani just got elected as mayor, earlier last year. And I believe that him and Trump won for the same reasons, which is because they really tapped into that pain point of this is not working for us right now. I mean, this world that we're in, the way that our economy is not working for the average person. I mean, Trump lied about a lot of the ways he would help people, but I do think they were kind of hitting the same pain point and campaigning on that same idea. And so I think that really does go to show just how disenfranchised a lot of people feel and how angry a lot of people feel.
Yeah. But I think separately from that, it's not just the pulling up of the ladder by the boomer generation. It's also that generation lived through a time where, quote unquote, all you had to do was go to college, get a good education, and that was going to set you on a course to do everything else you wanted to do. And so they raised their children with that same belief system and that same mantra. So they focused on, how do I make my kids as elite as possible? Every single hour of every single day, especially on the weekends, went toward improving your resume so that a college would pick you out of the basket of, applicants that they had that had all the same 4.0 GPA plus, had all the same extracurriculars and everything else. And because you speak Portuguese, they'll pick you over the kid that only speaks French or whatever. And that kind of hyper elite, hyper focus on improving yourself and your stance and your standing made sense when basically a third of the population went to college and was going to be afforded those opportunities. But now you have a world where, because millennials are more educated than our parents' generation was, more formally educated, I should say, than our parents' generation was, you have 2/3 of the population still vying for a third of those elite level positions. And that's where some of that disconnect comes as well.
Something I also see with my parents is they are really fixated on like company loyalty. So it's like, oh, you're changing jobs way too much. Like, you really need to stay in this job for like 5 years. It's not good to switch, or like you just need to ride it out. Like, and again, I think that's very much coming from an economic context where, you're at these jobs for decades, but you get rewarded, whether it be through a pension, whether it be through, company loyalty was much more of a thing. Mm-hmm. And in our current industry, which is really propped up by like contract work and gig work, I think I would argue that a lot of company loyalty is quite dead. And so, I actually just saw that headline that job switching, that percent increase, the pay bump that you get from job switching has actually gone down a lot. But there was a point where job switching was very advantageous for you.
Now we're job hugging again.
Exactly. Now we're job hugging. So, but again, I think it's a good example of like the economic framing that a lot of baby boomers have, because that's the environment that they grew up in compared to what younger generations see.
Well, and that's something we've talked about before, which is, what is the advantage to, right now, what is the advantage to staying at a job? And the advantage is that you have a job while maybe the artificial intelligence demons are let out of the box to create AGI, and maybe you'll be able to hug on to that job long enough before that happens. Before that, it was, you get to stay at a job, you get a pension, you're going to count on salary increases that may be beyond the cost of living. That started to disappear in the 1980s. That wasn't directly related to right now. That was when computers came online. And that's when sort of that disconnect between, if you just have a college degree, you're not going to necessarily be better off as the economy grows. You're going to keep your head at water. But one of the structural things I want to talk about too is like, just the way the tax system is set up, because that's one of the ways where I think a lot of people in our generation are like, this feels unfair, but can't exactly name it. And I think one example of that is just how standard deductions work for your taxes. Most people take a standard deduction. If you are a senior, you get to take an extra standard deduction because of your age. And now you get an enhanced senior deduction because of that age. And on top of that, you're making more money from your investments than a salary. So the way this boils down from the math I did is that if you're a single worker who's 30 years old, making $120,000 per year, you have an effective tax rate that is roughly 2x a senior making the same amount of money from dividends and 401k distributions. And oh, by the way, they get about an extra $25,000 a year from Social Security. So that person is making more than 20 grand more than you per year than the single worker. But because you're paying FICA taxes, because our system treats income that comes in from your labor so much differently than income from investments, that creates a structural dynamic where now you have even less money to spend in your earlier years because the money you get from your salary is punished more than the money that Coca-Cola gives you from a dividend.
I'm glad you pointed that out because that's a perfect representation of pulling the ladder up with you. You had a boomer president. In 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed by the first Trump administration, which first enacted the enhanced deduction for seniors. Then in the second Trump administration with the OBBBA, you had a super enhanced standard deduction for those 65 and up. So in both cases, it's us looking out for ourselves and pulling the ladder up along with us and handing this additional deduction to the group of people who already had all the mechanisms supporting them and making sure that they were going to be comfortable, instead of handing that down to folks in their 20s and 30s who we're trying to encourage so hard to go have babies and get married and buy houses and everything else. So the way to do this would have been the inverse. It would have been to give the enhanced deduction to people in their 20s and 30s who are earlier on in their careers who need the additional $5,000 in tax incentives to go do all the things that represent traditional life markers.
And I'm just going to go, I know I brought this up earlier, I'm just going to go on a slight tangent about the whole property tax of it all too, because this is another great example. I know this is something that's more being enacted on the state level, but I find all these arguments so ridiculous about wanting to ban property taxes because obviously people that own homes are disproportionately older, disproportionately wealthier. And on top of this, property taxes, I mean, hopefully people understand this, but property taxes like fund municipal goods in your neighborhoods. And so the reason why your home value has probably gone up all this amount, over X amount of years is because you're living in a desirable neighborhood, which in part is funded by property taxes. And so I find it bizarre that people want to abolish property taxes or whatever, because one, I mean, I think you guys probably know this, but it really blows my mind how people don't understand the tax system or how taxes work. But, that tax money is going to have to come from somewhere. It's not just going to like disappear into the ether. And two, it's going to have like a direct impact on your quality of life in your neighborhood. And again, it's another example of like pulling up the ladder behind you because it disproportionately is benefiting older generation of baby boomers who have, been in their homes for years. They've really benefited from their home value going up significantly while tons of young people can't even afford to buy a home. So
the flip side of that, that I have seen, I think there needs to be a strong exception is I've seen it in Ohio with farmland where someone may have a lot of land, but they're not necessarily super rich. Same thing in Texas, where you need people raising cattle for the American beef industry. And if you are taxing them just on the value of their land, and there's economic value coming from that can make it almost impossible for them to live, I would say, in that economic system. They can't have that job if the value of their land that's getting taxed is continually going up while maybe they have a variable income from farming. But I agree with most of the point.
Interestingly,
too,
though, when you make that point, a lot of the wealth that we're describing that's part of the great wealth transfer is going to be in the form of property. It's going to be in the form of real estate. And presumably the children who are doing the inheriting are going to at that point be in their 60s and 70s and are not going to have any interest in owning that property. And so what does that mean for the housing market 20, 30 years down the line that suddenly gets flooded with all of these homes that these boomers aged into and, passed away in? And so the housing problem that we have now is we have a shortage. Nobody's building new homes. Are we potentially headed for a world where everybody's passing this wealth along to their kids in the form of real estate that just hits the market all at once? And it's a depression again of the value of these assets that aren't as meaningful and aren't as valuable down the road as they would have been now.
Yeah. And I guess I'm curious kind of what the the planning advice there is like, for example, my parents have just retired. They are building a home in South Carolina on the beach, and they say like, oh, obviously when we pass, we're going to give you guys a home. And I'm like, I don't want it.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't even think there's going to be a home with the way the sea levels are rising. I hope
Which is a conversation that usually doesnn't even happen.
Yeah. Like I hope it is around while you guys are still alive, but if it gets swallowed up by the sea after that, it's kind of, neither here nor there in my mind. But I am thinking like, I don't want to deal with this house that, I don't personally want to live in. And, like you just said, there's a very good chance that it's going to be joined with, hundreds of thousands of other homes, flooding the market. And yeah, I think it's going to raise a lot of questions to come, about how that's going to look in the future.
Hanna has been incredibly generous with her time. I want to start rounding third and heading for home, to use a unnecessary sports metaphor. But as we start to wrap up, big question. What do you do about the inheritocracy? We've laid out a lot of the problems, family relationships, key figures in this. What do you do about the inheritocracy? Any ideas, Malcolm? We'll start with you.
I think, well, it's twofold. It's what do you do about it when you're the benefactor? And then what do you do about it when you are the beneficiary? For the generation doing the gifting and the giving, I think it's more important that you start sketching out a plan and having conversation about how you might be able to enhance your kid's ability to move through life with a little bit of freedom now, rather than waiting 20, 30 years from now when it won't matter anymore. And you could just think through what life looked like and felt like for you in your 30s and 40s when someone giving you a gift of $50,000, $100,000 or whatever, what impact that would have had on your ability to do everything. Versus if I were to hand you that same 50,000, 100,000 adjusted for inflation, even if I was to hand that to you now today at 70, 80, 90, like what impact would that really have on your life? And that's presumably what we're proposing to turn around and do. So I think that's from that side. I think on the other side, it's ask enough questions to feel like you have a plan and some semblance of reality without being too intrusive and too invasive on the front end. And I'm talking about the inheritors at this point, because what I've seen is the fear for the parents is like, I don't want them to know exactly what I have, which is fine. No one should know exactly what you have. No one in your family should know exactly what you have, right? But you should still give them some idea and some direction for what's coming, what your ideas and thoughts and plans are, what you'd like to see get carried on in your name, like what you want your financial legacy to be. And so as the inheritors, I think it's important to do what you can to initiate those kinds of conversations while you have your parents to talk about it with them. Because what we haven't talked about at all is a separate sermon for a different day. I've seen where some clients will inherit money from their parents. They'll inherit a property from their parents and they're paralyzed by fear and won't even like sell a share of stock or won't sell the property or won't, they inherited cash and they won't even put it into any place that's going to meaningfully earn anything because they're like, well, I don't know if my parents would have wanted me to do that. So just lightly having the conversation now will save you a ton of strife later.
Okay. So Malcolm says, go to therapy. Hanna, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I second Malcolm kind of on the like individual level of kind of how to definitely having those conversations early. I'll kind of take a more like structural kind of lens, which is, there is a policy conversation to kind of be had here. And it's not saying we need to like, it's about inheritance taxes or anything like that. It's more about like, we should probably be thinking about funding a system and shared public goods so people's life outcomes don't depend on who their parents are and the money that they can get from their parents. And I think that's kind of the question that inheritocracy kind of asks or presents in the book. And so I think it's a worthwhile one. And again, while I think the individual stuff is like super important and obviously like we have agency and we should like be having these conversations, it's also kind of understanding these structural problems that created these conditions and like how do we collectively, work towards an environment where, the K-shaped economy doesn't keep K-ing, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I'll go with Hannah's point that it is structural. I think the national debt is a top 3 economic issue for people in our generation. That's not slowing down. And so far, our best crack at it has been Elon Musk on ketamine, carrying a chainsaw in various stages. And that hasn't been addressed in a real and serious way. I think that there's a lot of sexier things to ask and demand of politicians, but that's a real question that directly impacts your life. So I hope more young people can ask about it. And then my cheeky answer to this is that number 1, start a reverse mortgage company. Number 2, promote on AM radio. And then number 3, profit. Malcolm, anything? There.
I just want to point out that the opinions of one host are not reflective of the views and opinions of anyone else on this podcast having this conversation at this very moment.
All right, Malcolm's out. Hanna, you want to? Anyway, we could stop there. Hanna, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. You can find Hanna at Your Brain on Money on social media. She has a great Substack also called Your Brain on Money. Malcolm is at Malcolm on Money on social media platforms. You can find me at Rick So Slick on X and Instagram. You can also find me on LinkedIn if that's how you want to play it. But the number one thing you can do to help this show is share it with a friend. Let someone who may find value in this episode, send it to them. We would really appreciate that. And thanks for spending your time with us.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here.
Information shared in this recording and by its guests represent the views and opinions of the guests and does not represent the views or opinions of the host. This content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. This content is not, nor is it intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. It is always recommended that you seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your personal financial situation.